Roughly 99 million years ago, during the Late Cretaceous, one of the Earth's largest theropods to ever exist was roaming northern Africa, the Spinosaurus. It was an absolute beast of a carnivore and has become widely popular thanks to pop culture. However, people sometimes forget that it wasn't the only theropod or carnivore around that time in northern Africa. And in fact, it wasn't even the only apex predator, as coincidentally, another giant theropod also lived alongside it that was equally ferocious, and had a bite so deadly that it was referred to as a giant terrestrial shark. This was the Carcharodontosaurus. If you're a fan of dinosaurs, you would probably heard of this name, as in the last 10 years, this theropod has really picked up a lot of steam. But the Carcharodontosaurus has actually been known to paleontology for far longer than 10 years, as it was discovered all the way back in 1914 when a partial skeleton was unearthed in Egypt by German paleontologists. However, as there was political tension in the region at the time, the skeleton wasn't sent to Germany until 1922, where it would then sit for an additional 9 years before finally being described by Ernst Stromer, who recognized it as both a new species and genus, naming it Carcharodontosaurus saharicus. The species portion of the name was a nod to where its remains were located, while the genus section means shark-toothed lizard, which is a reference to how the teeth of this theropod heavily resembled those of a great white shark. Along with its peculiar dentition, it was also noted that the Carcharodontosaurus possessed a variety of other features that made it much different than your average theropod. However, before more research could be published, the skeleton was sadly destroyed during World War II. Fortunately for paleontologists, more remains have been found since, which allowed scientists to understand the many reasons why this theropod was such a successful predator. And one of the biggest reasons it became nearly unstoppable was its gigantic size. The Carcharodontosaurus was not only one of the largest late Cretaceous theropods to live, but also one of the largest carnivores to exist, period. This glory, however, does not extend to all Carcharodontosauruses, as in 2007, a new species, the Equidensis, was described, which was about the size of a Gorgosaurus, which, while impressive, this size does not make it one of the largest theropods. However, the original species, the Saharicus, did achieve titanic sizes, as paleontologists currently estimate that adults could have reached 12.5 meters or 41 feet in length, while possessing a hip height of 3.6 meters or 12 feet. Scientists further believe that certain individuals could have actually exceeded these measurements, with larger specimens coming in at over 13 meters or 43 feet from snout to tail. At this length, it came as no surprise that it was rather hefty, tipping the scales at over 6 metric tons, making it 88 times heavier than the average human. At this length and weight, the Carcharodontosaurus was the 5th largest theropod to ever exist, which also means it is the 5th largest terrestrial carnivore to ever live, which is quite the accomplishment. However, its body size was not the only thing that made this behemoth deadly. In fact, one could argue that the true weapon of the Carcharodontosaurus was not its stature, but its bite. The Carcharodontosaurus had a chomp that would have terrified any dinosaur, as it possessed 62 teeth that were long, razor-sharp, and lined with a vast amount of serrations. Specifically, about 20 serrations per 1 centimeter or 0.4 inches of edge. This made its teeth eerily similar to those of the great white shark and would have sheared massive chunks of flesh off of unfortunate prey, which is exacerbated by the fact that its skull was also ridiculously large. In fact, the most completed skull found, which is also the largest known, rivals the skulls of the largest T.rexes, being around 1.6 meters or 5.2 feet in length. However, unlike the T.rex's skull, that of the Carcharodontosaurus was much lighter, as it did not rely on a crushing bite to finish animals off. Rather, it used lighter or weaker bites to tear and slice through flesh, provoking major blood loss. Although this isn't to say the Carcharodontosaurus had a weak bite, as at its maximum it still mustered over 25,000 newtons of force, making it 39% more powerful than the bite of a large great white shark. At this power, its teeth would have no problem slicing through soft flesh, but it probably would have left bones alone. Yet, even when solely aiming for vulnerable parts of other dinosaurs, it appears that hunting got quite bloody and messy for this theropod. As paleontologists have discovered, it had one of the highest tooth replacement rates of any theropod, indicating that it was rather routine for teeth to become lodged in meat during attacks. Other research into the hunting patterns of the Carcharodontosaurus show that it was likely an ambush predator, as it possessed a vision that was comparable to that of crocodiles, indicating they probably sensed animals using motion parallax. while also using its narrow binocular vision to judge prey distance and time attacks, before using its powerful legs to run the unsuspecting dinosaur down. The Carcharodontosaurus also possessed yet another weapon that was also located on its skull, its crests. It's not actually certain what these crests were used for, but in recent times, paleontologists have started to believe that they were likely used to butt heads with other Carcharodontosaurus, perhaps during fights over mates, territories, or resources. Unlike the Carcharodontosaurus's crests, we can confidently state the next portion, and that is, we have just launched our Patreon for Extinct Zoo. Through Patreon, you'll be able to further interact with us, see what we're working on, and also tell us and vote for what you want to see next. And of course, if you enjoy our videos, this really will help support the channel and give us more resources to work on them and improve the quality for you all. And so the hope is that eventually we can spend even more time on these videos and more resources to give you all the best experience. With all of that said, we'll leave a link down below to our Patreon, and now, back to the Carcharodontosaurus. Despite its head possessing its most important and prominent features, this terrifying theropod also had other tricks that allowed it to become an apex predator, one of which was actually its arms. Theropods in general, and especially large ones, are often thought to have had fairly useless or even vestigial arms. Yet for the Carcharodontosaurus, its upper arms appear to have played a big role in hunting. They were slightly longer than the arms found in the T.rex and were heavily muscled in life. Scientists believe that it mainly used these forelimbs to grasp prey to prevent escapes, but it may have also used them to lift prey up. One study in particular suggested that an adult was capable of picking up a half-ton dinosaur off of the ground and lifting it towards its mouth. Additionally, the hands of the Carcharodontosaurus were possibly used as slashing weapons, as each finger was equipped with a sharp or recurved claw. The combination of its arms, teeth, vision, and size truly made the Carcharodontosaurus a nightmare that every other dinosaur must have dreaded, and findings have shown that it may even have dreaded itself. Numerous specimens have been unearthed with breaks, infections, and puncture marks to the head, suggesting that fights among this titanic theropod was not uncommon. The puncture wounds and infections were attributed to face fighting, while some speculated the breaks came from the crests. However, as it's not known how durable the crests were, it's not 100% certain that they caused the breaks found in the skulls. While these interspecies fights must have been a welcome sight for all the other animals, the Carcharodontosaurus, unfortunately for them, still spent more time hunting than fighting others of its own kind, and it's believed that these unfortunate victims consisted mainly of a mix of sauropods, ornithopods, non-dinosaur animals, and possibly smaller theropods. With such an impressive diet, the Carcharodontosaurus definitely lived up to its name and gave its family a terrifying reputation, with its family, the Carcharodontosauridae, being named after it. This group produced some of the most terrifying carnivores ever, and includes Carcharodontosaurus and all species closer to it than either to Allosaurus, Sinraptor, Monolophosaurus, or Cryolophosaurus. Many members of this group became extremely successful, and the Carcharodontosaurus was no exception, as it managed to spread quite far, with remains being found throughout North Africa, in Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Niger, and Tunisia. It lived in these lands between 99 and 94 million years ago during the earliest stage of the Late Cretaceous. Back then, northern Africa was very different than it is today, being covered with a sprawling mangrove forests and wetlands, creating rich dinosaur hotspots. And because the Carcharodontosaurus is known from many different formations, all of which were extremely diverse, we can conclude it lived with a huge range of dinosaur life that included sauropods such as Aegyptosaurus, Dicraeosaurus, Rebucchosaurus, and Paralotitan, as well as unidentified ankylosaurs and ornithopods. The Carcharodontosaurus also lived alongside numerous theropods, including Spinosaurus, Rugops, Deltadromeus, Sauroniops, Bahariosaurus, and multiple unidentified species. The surprising amount of these theropods came close to the size of the Carcharodontosaurus, with the Spinosaurus even outsizing it. Such a high number of giant predators and sauropods has led many to compare northern Africa to the Morrison Formation in North America. It's believed that niche partitioning would have played a big role in mitigating potential conflict between theropods, with dinosaurs like Spinosaurus hunting more aquatic prey, while Carcharodontosaurus preferring more terrestrial food. But there is no doubt that conflict still arose from time to time. And again, similar to the Morrison Formation, these lands seem to have experienced extensive dry seasons or resources dwindled. However, unlike the Morrison, it seems that theropods in North Africa prefer to turn on non-dinosaur life forms during these dry spells rather than on each other, which was possible since North Africa was home to an abundance of other animals and life, the likes of which is rarely seen in Cretaceous formations. Such life included over 10 types of pterosaurs, 5 amphibians, 10 crocodilomorphs, 4 turtles, 2 lizards, 5 snakes, 20 different types of cartilaginous fish, 20 ray-finned fish, 3 lobe-finned fish, 17 crustaceans, 7 mollusks, and heavy evidence that insects were present as many flora bared extensive damage. The flora that dominated these lands seemed to have been ferns and conifers, with ferns in particular holding the reign, with half of the species being ferns. It was here in North Africa that the Carcharodontosaurus made its mark in the land and its inhabitants for over 5 million years. However, it seems that even being the 5th largest terrestrial predator ever is not enough to beat Mother Nature in time, as the Carcharodontosaurus disappeared roughly 94 million years ago. It's not exactly known what caused its extinction, yet most believe that a loss of habitat led to its decline, while others reference the disappearance of coexisting large sauropods, its supposed food supply, as being the final nail in its coffin.